A lot of business leaders, and frankly, even a lot of so called AI experts, are getting this wrong. They think that AI, meaning large language models, will solve every business problem. And that's just not the case. Now, large language models are very powerful tools, but they're just one tool in a much broader AI and data science toolkit. So if you try and solve every business problem with an LLM, you're going to make a mess of your business. Hi, I'm Joshua Ebner. I'm a 20-year expert in AI, machine learning, and data science. And I've seen how the top companies in the world, like the FAANG companies, use AI the right way. They use the right tool for the right job. Okay, to help explain what I'm talking about here, let me give you an analogy. Let's say you're trying to build a house. As you build a house, you have to solve a variety of problems. You might have to saw some 2x4s. You're going to have to nail those 2x4s together. You're going to have to do electrical wiring and a variety of other things. Are you going to try and solve all of those problems only with a hammer? Now, of course, nailing things together, hammering in nails, yeah, you're going to use a hammer. But can you saw 2x4s apart using a hammer? You could try. You could probably use the back end, the claw end of a hammer to try and chip them apart. And there's a variety of other things that you could maybe do, but it's really not going to work very well. A hammer is a very good tool for hammering nails, but it's also a pretty bad tool for a variety of other things that you're going to need to do. So, to kind of summarize the point, if you need to build a house, you need a pretty broad set of tools to accomplish a variety of tasks and reach your goal. And in business, it's actually very similar. You're going to face a variety of different problems and challenges. And in order to overcome those challenges and solve the problems, you need to use different tools. So let me give you a couple of examples. The first one is, let's say you have a go to market problem. Now, very briefly, go to market is everything that it takes to sell and distribute a product or service to customers. It's pretty broad, but it's also very important for almost every single business. And in order to build a good go to market strategy, you need to understand your customers, what they like, the sort of product features they want, how they want to be communicated to, the sort of messages that resonate. It's really part of the foundation of building a business. And if you have a problem with your go to market, you're not going to solve that problem with an LLM. In order to solve a go to market problem, there's really a set of gold standard tools and techniques that we use. Now, yes, I will admit that you can use an LLM as sort of a advisor or a sparring partner, asking it questions, trying to figure out some of the things that you'll need to do. But the gold standard tools that we're going to use are primarily things like customer research and maybe most importantly, segmentation and customer analytics. So typically we will use something called a segmentation model, usually using a technique called k-means clustering or something like that. I'll set that aside exactly what that is and talk about it another time. But we'll use a segmentation model to take a big customer base and then figure out what sorts of subsegments are in the customer base. This is very important, particularly at a certain scale. Once you get past the true startup phase, you have maybe different groups of customers that might want different things. So you can use a segmentation model to figure out what the subgroups are and figure out exactly what they want, what they value, what messages resonate, and so on. This set of techniques is the gold standard at many of the most admired companies in the world. Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Google, they all use segmentation and customer analytics to solve these sorts of go to market problems, both if they're creating a new product or if they're simply trying to slightly restructure their go to market strategy as they scale out a particular product or service. So it's important to reemphasize that if you have a go to market problem, and this can happen at startup or mid scale or even very large enterprises have these issues, you are not going to use a large language model. There's a different set of tools. Next, let's say you have a churn problem. Churn, just to give you a quick recap, churn is when you have existing customers and they stop being your customers. This is very common with things like SaaS businesses and also with any sort of business where there's a sort of subscription or a retainer model, recurring payments. So this problem comes up with a lot of different business models. If you have a churn problem, you again are not going to solve that issue with a large language model. Now, again, I'll reiterate that you can use an LLM to simply ask questions and try and get some good advice. And LLMs will help that way, but that's ultimately not the tool that you're going to use. To solve a churn problem, you're typically going to do probably one to three things. You're first going to analyze your customer data. And if you don't have that, you might need to start by gathering the right customer data. That can be with databases, things that are automatically collected from transactions and things like that, but also by getting surveys, interviews, stuff like that. So you collect data, you can analyze that data with a variety of techniques, and maybe even by building a machine learning model. Remember, machine learning is actually a type of AI. So you could build maybe a decision tree model or something else, get lots of insights into what the drivers are of the churn that enables you, once you identify the drivers, then you can start fixing those problems in your business. That helps you solve churn. But to go a step further, you can also build what we call a churn model, a predictive model. And again, predictive models are really a type of AI. AI is broader than generative models like ChatGPT. AI includes things like predictive models. So, in the case of churn, specifically, what you're going to do is you'll probably build something called a classification model. It's a very specific type of machine learning model that makes predictions, and it makes categorical predictions. I'll set aside some of those details and maybe talk about them in the future. But churn models are the gold standard for making predictions about who is going to churn. And once you can predict who's going to churn, then you can go and talk to those people and say, hey, how are you doing? How is your experience? Can we help you in any way? Something like that. So usually you're using a churn model to try and figure out who's likely to churn and then intervene. Again, these techniques are gold standard. All the FAANG companies, as well as big banks and media companies, insurance companies, the list goes on and on. These are the gold standard techniques among very technologically sophisticated enterprises and corporations, but you can do these things even at much smaller scale. So, what I want to emphasize is that if you have a churn problem, you're really not going to solve that just with a large language model. You're probably going to need customer analytics and a churn model. So, to kind of recap, what I'm saying here is that in business, different problems require different tools. LLMs are very good at providing advice, giving you information, kind of acting like a search tool. They're even good at things like writing code. But other problems, whether it's customer acquisition, solving customer satisfaction problems, building a great product or improving that product over time, solving go to market, increasing revenue, increasing profit. There are different tools that you can use to solve those different problems. So if you just think about large language models as the only type of AI and try and solve every problem with just an LLM, you're probably going to make a mess of things. So I recommend that you learn all the different tools that solve these different problems, and you will be able to grow your revenue, grow your profitability, increase your productivity like many of the best companies in the world. What do you think? Have you gotten frustrated trying to use a large language model and found that it didn't quite help as much as you thought it would? Do you have experience with some of these other tools? Have you seen them work in your business? I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below.